restored around the state to New Yorkers? Not at all. Is this state capitol any more accountable and transparent because of the last 24 hours of rushing to pass whatever they could? It's actually quite the opposite. I mean, this is a process that has been broken for so long. I remember serving here in the state legislature for 4 years, 2 terms, and you get to the end of the session and it's this all-nighter. You have to be seated raising your hand to vote no. If you're not raising your hand to vote no, you're recorded as a yes. At that time, there was a state senate with 63 senators, which is the case now. They had just added the additional seat. I remember there being about 13 people or so left in the chamber, and a big fat bill hits our desk. The bill did not exist until just moments before the vote. It's hot off the presses, no one's read it, no one knows what's in it. The bill passes. And you have to then find out in the days and weeks, the months that follow, what it was that you just voted on. Most of the senators weren't even in the chamber to vote no, they get recorded as a yes. This state capitol should be restored to pre-pandemic access for media, to chambers, to members. Why hasn't that happened yet? The media has a job to do to report to the people of New York as to what is happening during the dark of night. It's bad enough when you have the legislature in session at midnight and 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. But get this, the legislators and the media and the public have absolutely no clue whatsoever what's coming. How wrong is that? Now, this is also an opportunity for the media to look at all of the promises that get made of what was sought out to get accomplished during the year. And then you scratch your head trying to think, well, why wasn't that done? Don't you remember earlier this year when Kathy Hochul came out in favor of term limits for all statewide elected officials? I mean, I've been calling for that a lot longer than she has. I believe that all statewide elected officials should be termed out. 2 terms, 4 years. Why wasn't that passed in the middle of all of this? I'll give you 10 different examples, and then honestly there's a list of hundreds. I'll give you 10 different examples of items that should have been passed, but they weren't. I mentioned the voter ID laws. What about all the crimes that have been getting committed in New York that have absolutely nothing at all to do with guns? We see the headlines of someone getting pushed in front of an oncoming subway car and they get killed. Another Asian American gets stabbed to death in their apartment in Lower Manhattan. Another Asian American is beaten to death with hammers. We saw 3 Jewish Americans physically assaulted within a week recently in Brooklyn. People are being harmed by hands, by hammers, by knives. Now, we have an issue, especially in New York City, but not just New York City, as it relates to crimes committed with illegal guns. There should be a conversation about that. But what about all of the other crimes that are being committed? If you're a small business owner and you're giving up all the looting of your small business, and bigger businesses too, they're just letting folks come in and out, no consequences. You have district attorneys like Alvin Bragg refusing to enforce the law. Where was any action whatsoever here? As a matter of fact, they did the opposite, because one of the bills they passed was the Clean Slate Act. Now, I believe that everybody believes in second chances, but this Capitol right now believes in 5th chances and 6th chances and 7th chances. What about the victim? They only get 1 shot. They get victimized and they look for justice. They want to be able to believe in the justice system. And with all the crimes and all the headlines, you know why Kathy Hochul got booed when she went to Madison Square Garden? There were thousands of Rangers fans inside of that arena upset that they don't feel safe on our streets to go to the Garden. They don't feel safe riding the subway to get to the Garden. That was the week where Kathy Hochul says we need to make big changes to cashless bail. Remember earlier, before she got roasted, she was saying, well, she needs to see the data. Well, I guess for the data for her, she counted the amount of people who were booing her out of Madison Square Garden, and that was enough data for her political scientists to decide to propose a change. We should truly address the problems with cashless bail, with the discovery law, with less is more, with the HALT Act, with raise the age. Did anything whatsoever happen here in this end of session rush? Did anything get done with regards to any of that? No. People aren't going to feel more safe on our streets when they wake up and read the headlines of what wasn't done here in the state capitol the last 24 hours. I supported proposed an overhaul of the Board of Parole in this state. It's part of my Secure Our Streets plan for New York. It's on my website at zeldinfornewyork.com. I believe that the Board of Parole should be overhauled from a majority vote to a unanimous vote. I believe that we should be allowing victims' rights, victims' families to be able to weigh in, have their testimony considered. Was anything at all done in the last 24 hours in this rush to pass as many bills as they can to try to get their agenda cleared? Was anything done in this building about the Board of Parole? Nothing. I support lifting the ban in this state on the safe extraction of natural gas. It could create jobs and generate revenue and revitalize communities and help bring down energy costs. There is so much that can be done in this state, tapping into our own resources. We could be exporting to other states, we could be exporting to other countries. Instead, this is a capital that bans the safe extraction of natural gas. Was anything done at all to make energy supply more abundant, to bring down energy costs? Was anything done in the last 24 hours that will create more jobs? Actually, no, quite the opposite. Was anything done to cut taxes? People are fleeing the state because they're struggling to afford to survive here. What taxes were cut? Now you can't say, well, you can only do stuff about tax relief in the budget. Now history has proven that that's not the case. When I was here in my first term, I believe it was the end of my first year, the end of session, the property tax cap was passed, the nation's strongest property tax cap, a 2% property tax cap, which I was proud to co-sponsor. So no one can say that an end of session rush to pass bills before leaving this building that you can't provide tax relief to New Yorkers. Voter ID. I support voter ID. I believe all 50 states in the country should have voter ID. New Yorkers want it. A large majority of New Yorkers want voter ID. Is anything done in here at all with it? No. Should have. How about removing Kathy Hochul's self-claimed COVID emergency powers? Every 30 days, she grants herself an extension. She grants herself an extension. She doesn't come to the legislature, her friends in the Assembly and Senate, Republicans, Democrats, whomever, and say, please, grant me permission to continue to have these outsized powers. She just does it herself. And the legislature just plays along with it. This was a great opportunity for the legislature to reassert itself in that process, but they did nothing. Tackling mental health and drug addiction. So in the news, it's personal. Whether it's fentanyl, whether it's people committing crimes who have mental illness, it's people on the streets. In many cases, they get called homeless and they actually have a place to go to. They're choosing to be on the streets. Others are homeless and they have mental health issues. What was done? Anything at all? No. Well, they did pass a cryptocurrency mining moratorium. Well, that was the wrong answer. As governor, today, I would veto it. Picking and choosing which industries are going to be able to tap into this energy supply. There are plenty of other tech companies that are tapping into energy supply to be able to do their business. Why is it that all of a sudden you pick one? At this moment in time, especially while so many inside of the crypto industry are trying to figure out ways to be more energy efficient. As a matter of fact, inside of New York, they've been even more aggressive in that effort than you've seen in other states and other countries. I mentioned clean slate. As governor, I would veto it. I believe that if you're a business owner, you should know whether or not that prospective employee is actually disqualified because of their past criminal behavior. If you're a landlord, you should know whether or not that prospective tenant is someone who's likely to pay their rent. If you're a parent, you should be able to verify whether or not that potential babysitter is somebody who's qualified to watch your kids. And that list goes on. The Clean Slate Act went way too far in this conversation and debate, and I would absolutely veto it. The New York State Building Public Renewables Act, which had just passed through the Senate, again cutting off choice, options, supply, is the wrong answer. This state is setting goals which, even if they're the best intention, even if they are the most laudable, they're not coming with a plan as to how to actually obtain these dates and these goals. The people who end up suffering the most are the people who can least afford it. So, and of course you've seen, listen, we can have a debate over the gun control package. I have my personal views on many of these bills and what happened in Buffalo and what happened in Texas. But ultimately, if we're going to take a step back and think to ourselves, why does New York lead the entire country in population loss? Republicans, Democrats, Independents, liberals, moderates, conservatives. I get it all day long. People tell me, if you don't win, I'm leaving. It doesn't matter what county I'm in. It could be blue county, it could be a red county. It doesn't matter what region I'm in. People are telling me that their wallets, their safety, their freedom, and their kids' education are under attack. And they're going somewhere else to some other state where they feel like their money will go further, they'll feel safer, they'll live life freer, so they decide, that's it, I'm gone. What happened in this building in the last 24 hours to deal with any of that? Nothing. That's why I'm running. I enjoy serving in the House. In my 4th term, I would get reelected to a 5th term. I could run for a position of leadership or a committee chairmanship. I'm just saying that because I didn't make this decision lightly. I'm all in. Our next Lieutenant Governor, Alice Esposito, has 24 years along a career in the NYPD. She was planning on making a 40-year career. She was the Deputy Inspector, Commanding Officer of the 70th Precinct in Brooklyn. She would have become a chief. Her father was a chief. That's all she wanted. She had to retire not to become our state's next Lieutenant Governor. Alice Esposito had to retire to run to be our state's next Lieutenant Governor. She's all in. And guess what, Kathy Hochul? To the Democrats with one-party supermajorities in the Assembly and Senate, there are way too many other people for their comfort around this state who are all in too. They understand the stakes. They've decided that this is a last stand time, and they've decided that losing is not an option. So what we have to do is take care of business. November 8th, all New Yorkers everywhere, all walks of life, to restore a capital that actually represents the people and will tackle this population loss and save our state. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Congressman, before the Buffalo massacre, you told an audience at a campaign event that we should not have red flag laws. Do you stand by that statement?
So I said we shouldn't have red flag laws that target law-abiding citizens.
Well, you said we should not have red flag laws. They are a slippery slope. They are a very slippery slope that could be targeting you, law-abiding gun owners. Do you stand by that?
100%. So now here's an issue with New York State's red flag laws. Let me answer your question. I see you're anxious to ask a follow-up already. I haven't even answered yet. So New York should be making a change to its red flag laws. So what can happen right now is a spouse, a neighbor can call in, you can have a fight, you have a neighbor, you have a loved one has a firearm, maybe it's somebody who works in your business, whatever it is. You can actually take away firearms in this state without a notice to that person who's about to lose their firearms that there's a hearing, for them to be present at the hearing, to be represented and to be able to make a case at the hearing. I don't agree with that. Secondly, there is a right to appeal in this state. The problem is that the burden on that person who just lost had their firearms taken away and they believe it was done unjustly and it shouldn't have been done, the burden is on them to prove by clear and convincing evidence, which is a really high bar, that they are worthy of getting their firearms back. Thirdly, is that a lot of fake accusations get made. We actually just had a bomb threat that was called in Suffolk County a few days ago. We take it very seriously. The district attorney, law enforcement, they were on top of it. That's wrong. It doesn't matter what age you are. There needs to be an example set. You need to be held accountable. Well, in New York, if you bring a fake accusation against someone to get their firearms taken away, there are no consequences. So my statement stands And what I believe should get done is that we do provide more due process to law-abiding gun owners so that they can't be unfairly targeted. Furthermore, the Buffalo shooter should have had no access to any firearms at all. He threatened to shoot up a school, which is a felony. They should have cracked down on him then with all the issues. And there's a debate, well, should he have had access to an AR-15? I don't think he should have had access to any firearms, to any weapons.
So to be sure, you do support red flag laws in theory for your statement a minute ago, right?
Yeah, so that has long been my position. I've been on the record as a member of Congress because we've had multiple incidents in the past where I have been asked about a particular person who's gotten access to a firearm. And what I've said is that terrorists, criminals, and the mentally ill should have access to none. Now, as far as mentally ill people, there's a subjective standard. There are people who are at the Thanksgiving table who want to declare, that cousin and wonder why they're in the family. Like, they declare that person mentally ill. That's a little bit different. But there are people who are seriously mentally ill and they manifest it. There are all sorts of people who should have access to no firearms at all, which has long been my position.
And you also said the same campaign event, you expressed support for a Stand Your Ground law here in New York. Do you support that?
I do. I don't believe that the government should be telling somebody that they have a duty to run away from a particular situation where they have a right to self-defense and they fear for their safety at that particular moment, and they make a decision for the sole reason of self-defense. Government putting the duty, the responsibility, the burden on that person who is being attacked, rather than having the responsibility, the burden, the duty on the person who is the attacker, is something that actually I believe is more dangerous than not having that.
When we talk about some of the laws that have been proposed from the president, or the ones that were passed last night, some of them seem like things that people have tried to pass in the past. Microstamping comes up specifically. That's been floated around before and it's never passed and never gone because, critics say that it's an unusable technology that doesn't really solve any crimes. Just speak to things like that.
Yeah, I have long opposed the microstamping bill. I continue to oppose the microstamping legislation. If I was the governor right now, I would veto it. This is one of those feel-good bills. Something happens and there's a desire to do something, do anything. So you take this bill off of the shelf, which, by the way, every time there's actually been a debate over it, and then you vet it out and there's a hearing, then you find out some of the flaws of the bill. That's why it's come up in the past. The public talks about it, media reports on it, and then they ultimately decide, actually, this is a bill that might be well-intentioned, but it won't have anything close to the desired effect. If you're a criminal, you could easily defeat that technology with household tools. So that's one of the main reasons why it was killed in the past. It's a bill that will end up targeting law-abiding citizens. It's not going to do anything as far as criminals.
Obviously, microstamping would have had nothing to do with the Buffalo or the Texas tragedy. It seems like being passed, just like you said, just have to do something.
Yeah, the irony of all ironies is that when Kathy Hochul was Congresswoman Hochul, she would go to the Hamburg Fairgrounds and she would go booth to booth to booth. She would spend hours there. She'd be there with her husband. She would be bragging to every table about her A rating from the NRA, how she was NRA endorsed. Table to table to table. Then all of a sudden, she becomes a statewide elected official, and she has a Democratic Party primary for governor on June 28th, and she wants to make believe like the person that she's always been is no longer who she is today. She says, I've evolved. She made a name for herself opposing driver's licenses for people who aren't legally in the state. Became known not just in her own county, but in other places. Then she became a statewide elected official. And she has a Democratic Party primary for governor on June 28th. So now she's trying to be some other person than who she used to be. You know what's worse than the bad first impressions she's making around the state? Siena College did a poll at the end of April, and interestingly enough, Siena College, which if you look at their methodology, they're predicting the worst Republican turnout in the history of the state. And I would disagree with that assessment. But their poll, I think, was about 22% Republican. Even in 2018, it was about 25%. I think in 2010 and 2014, it was a little over 30%. So their sample, which oversamples New York City, and it has registered voters, not likely voters, and it only has 22% Republicans. That poll said that her approval rating was 36 approved, 57 disapproved. That biased poll, with that methodology, with the undersampling of Republicans, has her that unpopular. Now, what happened in July, if you were taking a little field trip down the average street of the state, and you ask people two questions: who is your lieutenant governor, and who is Kathy Hochul? Even with the clue of the second question, people would have said, I don't know, and I don't know. That would have been the average question you would have gotten around the state. She's making a really bad first impression. You know what's worse than that? The people who know you best and know that the person you are acting like today is not who you are, who you've ever been, that you're doing it for selfish political calculations, it's pathetic. She is trying to be a tax and spend pro-criminal liberal. She's pandering. She has a weakness inside of New York City. She's not from New York City, she's not a minority, and she doesn't have the credibility with the far left. She's trying to make up for it. By the way, that's why she picked Brian Benjamin as a lieutenant governor. So when I go to Hamburg, which has happened now 3 times at least since she's become governor, you know, the second trip, I was invited by Democrats to the Hamburg Public Library. They were people who say that they've known Kathy Hochul since she was young. These were active Democrats, loyal Democrats, and they invited me to be there, and they wanted it to be known that I was there because they are so upset with how she's acting as governor. I believe that we're going to do very well inside of Western New York, because what's worse than a bad first impression is people who know you and you're acting like someone else. What's happening, to answer your question, is that once this tragedy took place in Buffalo, there was a desire to be able to pull bills off the shelves and pass them before the end of session, and then go home and claim that you did something about it, forgetting about the irony of the fact that she's a self-proclaimed A-rated, NRA-endorsed member of Congress turned governor, and that she's evolved on this and evolved on that and evolved on this and evolved on that. That's why you're seeing all of these different bills getting passed right now.
What's your thoughts on the recent abortion legislation, specifically the one that would create a temporary task force to study pregnancies, pro-life pregnancies?
To study them?
Yeah.
What do they want to study about them?
I think they want to study whether or not they are offering abortion evidence.
Well, listen, I mean, it's a two-way street. If you want to talk about legislation like that and you actually want to turn it into an idea that we should be debating and vetting and having public hearings about, what about the other centers that are encouraging abortions without, what about the 4D sonogram, the power of it? And having someone there who is able to speak to that young family, that potential young mother going through a very difficult, oftentimes unexpected moment in their lives. I visited Soundview Pregnancy Center, for example, in Suffolk County. And the stories, the personal stories, well, I went to a fundraising banquet of theirs. There were many hundreds of people there. And there were a whole bunch of people there who went into Soundview Pregnancy with every intention of getting an abortion. And because of the services provided inside, they are so happy that whether they credit the 4D sonogram, whether it was just the people they had to talk to. For others, maybe they hadn't been thinking about adoption. I mean, there are plenty of other parents out there who would love to adopt. There are parents out there who want to have kids, they can't. What a blessing for that family to be able to adopt a young kid. So if you actually, in good faith, forget about the politics, the partisanship, the campaigns are coming up, you're jockeying for trying to score political blows. If you were to take that idea you just mentioned and you wanted to try to craft it into something where conservatives, moderates, liberals, Democrats, independents, Republicans, whether you consider yourself to be pro-life, you consider yourself to be pro-choice, you can all sit around the table and say, let's make a good bill that we can find common ground on. You have to be willing to study all of these centers for what is or isn't being discussed behind closed doors, if you want to open that door.
Speaking about the guns once again, can you speak to the president's address last night and your reaction to what he said?
I feel like the president and members of his party in Congress are going down a very dangerous, unconstitutional road with their goals. Some of them are lauding Justin Trudeau, who's going even further and seeking to ban access to handguns. There are people who are talking about this issue and you can tell that they don't actually know anything about firearms. That's always a red flag, for lack of a better term. When the SAFE Act got passed, they were defining what an assault rifle was based on the looks of it, not the lethality. So if you go out and you obtain a rifle legally, and you add a single feature to it, a collapsible buttstock, a pistol grip, a thumb grip, a flash suppressor, a muzzle compressor, by adding a single feature to it, it's now defined as an assault rifle in the state and therefore banned. Now, opponents of the SAFE Act, such as myself, have long stated, here's one of the issues, is you're targeting law-abiding citizens. If you're a criminal, what you could do is legally obtain a rifle and then just modify it. And then sure enough, as we saw with the Buffalo shooting, somebody legally obtained a rifle and then added certain features to it that under New York State law, under the SAFE Act, would be an assault rifle. But what's happening right now at the national level, people are talking about this issue where it's clear by the terms that they're using, either the definition provided or the lack of definition provided, that they're just trying to make stuff fit into a political narrative, political goals. We had one member of the House Judiciary Committee yesterday lecturing Republican colleagues, saying that he doesn't want to hear about constitutional rights. You're a member of Congress. You took an oath to uphold the United States Constitution. If you have a problem with the Second Amendment, that member of Congress should be proposing an amendment to the Constitution. You don't just lecture your political opposition as if they're all bad, poorly intentioned people when they're talking about how something might be unconstitutional. So I feel like there's a very dangerous road that's being driven down by the president, the administration, members of Congress. I don't agree with it. By the way, Congress, when they've worked together in the past, Fix NICS got passed, signed into law in 2017. The Stop School Violence Act became passed, got through the entire process after that, after Parkland, product of everybody working together. That's the way to get stuff done. I don't care what the issue is. If we're talking healthcare, we're talking immigration, you want to talk about guns, whatever the topic is of the day, whenever you go at it alone, especially when you don't really know what you're talking about, it's a recipe for disaster.
Congressman, your campaign finance disclosures show that you've been spending quite a bit of hundreds of thousands of dollars per week, presumably on TV ads and the like. Is your campaign struggling with money in the home stretch of this campaign?
Not at all. I mean, we're in great shape. We are actually only ramping up our TV spend between now and June 28th. So we implemented a budget. Actually, we implemented a budget before I even decided to get in the race. We're implementing right now a budget that was set March of 2021. I got in the race April 8th of 2021, 19 months to the day before the election. We went up on air the first week of February. I believe the budget was in the mid-90s. Went up to 116, week 2, week 3. Thing went up into the 270s, week 4. It was all on budget. So this week, I'll have to double check. I think we might be just over 400, which has been around the level we've been at for the last few weeks. And the budget only increases from here to June 28th. Since the beginning of February on TV, we've spent, I guess, about $4.5 million just on TV. We have radio ads out, we do digital ads, we have mail pieces out. So there are a lot of ways that we engage with the public as far as paid voter contact. We were in the field last week for a poll. We were very happy with the results. We were at 41%. The other three were at 18, 17, and 13. The primary's 3.5 weeks from now. If anybody knows a registered Republican out there, I should be saying it loud for anyone who might be anywhere else enjoying their lunch. There's a primary. Actually, by the way, anyone else who's out there is a Democrat. There's a lot of confusion. People don't realize that there's a primary for every registered Republican and every registered Democrat throughout the state of New York. Some think it got moved to August 23rd. It did for the House and State Senate. For all other primaries, it's coming up 3.5 weeks away on June 28th. But we're very happy with the money that has been spent, the money that we're spending now, the money that we have to spend going forward. And oh, by the way, we have 10 other fundraisers planned as well, so the money will keep coming in on top of it.
Appreciate the detail there. Your financial disclosures show about $2.2 million in donations in excess of the primary limit of $13,700 some change. Is that $2.2 million included in the $3.1 million cash on hand that you reported?
Yeah, we have over $3 million that can be spent for the primary.
But does that total does not include that 2.2 million?
Here's the thing about me. Now we're just getting to know each other. I dot all of my I's and cross all of my T's and ask my questions. I will retain lawyers to ask my questions. We will go to the Board of Elections to confirm what we think. So this is actually a topic that very early on we went to treasurer, attorney, and BOE, all to confirm that the interpretation was accurate, that all of this money, we have over $3 million right now as of today, that can be spent between now and June 28th.
Does that include that $2.2 million I mentioned?
Yeah, no, so we reported, I forgot the exact number, we reported just over $3 million on last Friday.
Right.
We had just over $3 million was money that can be used for the primary. So as far as, I know that of the just over $3 million that we reported cash on hand on February, we have just over $3 million that can be spent between now and June 28th.
But that includes the $2.2 million that was given for the general election campaign.
As far as accounting goes, if a dollar was spent 5 weeks ago or 5 months ago or 10 months ago that you're including, if it was spent already, then the answer would be no, that's not included in the $2.2 million because it's been spent already. So there's money that gets raised since the first day that we got in on April 8th. There's money that we're raising today. There's money that gets spent every day. And as far as the money that's being spent on July 3rd of 2021, how much of that money that day was from a donation that was for $5? How much of that was someone's donation for 10? How much of that was someone's donation for 60?
Well, my impression is money given for general election campaigns cannot be spent on the primary campaign whatsoever.
That's not true. And checked, double checked, and we triple checked. Went to an attorney, went to the BOE to make sure our I's were dotted and T's crossed.
Thanks for answering.
When it comes to mental health, can you talk about your stance and what you'd like to see done to prevent
Well, first off, there's a model that I believe works in this state, created a decade ago. I was honored to lead the charge to create the PFC Joseph Dwyer Veteran Peer Support Program. And there are people who feel isolated and alone. They're going through mental health challenges. And for them to be in a setting with others, to talk about what they're experiencing, to know that they shouldn't feel isolated and alone, that there are people who can help them through it, that there are anonymous settings. There's some who rush to medicate someone else. I don't believe that the one-size-fits-all solution here. I have seen the benefit of a companion animal. I've seen the benefit of fly fishing. I've seen the benefit of training a wild horse, putting someone with the mental wounds of war in the same area as a horse who's experiencing their own mental issues, and they heal each other. I believe that this is a model that should be for non-veterans as well. It's now been proven to work. We've expanded it around the state. Everyone talks about how it saves lives. We need to see it elsewhere. Now, some people with mental health challenges have drug addiction issues that they're trying to deal with. Others have alcoholism that they're struggling with. Others, skills that they need to be able to get and hold a job. Others maybe dropped out of school and should see the value in finishing up their degree. People seek out purpose in life, and it helps with recovery. There are experts, by the way, who know far more than any of us, and they've spent decades in the field, and they'll write the books that we read. We should lean on them for advice, because I feel like the state isn't tapping into that expertise. One of the ways to lean into that advice is not just advising people here in this building behind me, but also we're closing down state prisons right now that in many cases just had big investments in infrastructure. I visited Ogdensburg earlier this year. Ogdensburg just built 5 years ago a big, beautiful, expensive roof on a huge building. They have all sorts of other buildings in great shape. They actually were completing a STEAM project, a multi-million-dollar STEAM project, even though the last correctional officer was going to leave permanently in 2 weeks. The last inmate was going to permanently leave in 2 weeks, and they were going to close it down and it was going to become abandoned. They still decided that they are going to have this contract, they are going to complete this multi-million-dollar project of a building that is going to immediately be put into disrepair. There are experts, there's an expertise out there, there are people who need help, there are great candidates for that help. The goal of someone who's homeless can't be to just put them into a shelter, high-five each other, and then move on with your day. The goal actually should be to get someone out of a shelter. And for some people who you're putting in the shelter, they're not getting the help that they need inside of that shelter. However, maybe that recently closed prison, Downstate Correctional Facility, or Willard. When you saw the announcement from Kathy Hochul about closing 6 prisons, she said, we need to focus more on drug treatment. I agree. Why are you closing down the only state-run drug treatment center as one of the 6? As these sites are getting closed down and they get abandoned, unused, they go into disrepair, I think part of that process should be how to utilize some of these locations. And there are individuals in a temporary setting, instead of paying just as much money to put them inside of a shelter, and they end up back on the streets, and it's cyclical, and they're committing crimes, and they can't get their life right. You have some great candidates to go into some of these sites. So there is not a soundbite to tackle the mental health challenges. I believe, we can have a whole conversation about education and family and poverty that all leads to very different paths in life and decisions that get made, and too often bad decisions that get made. But everything that I just shared would all be part of a very detailed plan to implement next year.
Why would a homeless person in New York City, possibly with mental health issues, maybe not, want to go to an upstate decommissioned prison, no matter how friendly the facility were? And how could you make them?
So first off, there's some people who are in the criminal justice system who need help, who the judge, the system, the prosecutor, maybe even working with the defense counsel, there's an opportunity to identify certain people to go. I don't think the best way to start this out of the gate is to have 6 or 16 open. The idea is you would open up one and you want to make it work. There are people who have issues with drug addiction, they have issues with alcohol addiction. There are people who hit that point where they decide that they need help. For others, they end up inside of a hospital. It's somewhat involuntarily. And then there's a decision of which direction you go next in your life. In the next few days, you go through 7 days of detox, and then maybe you need 30 or 60 or 90 days of getting more intense therapy. But maybe your drug addiction or your alcohol addiction is just one component of what you need. So, and by the way, on top of it, you also have people who are, their insurance might not be covering them because maybe they already went to 2 different locations, and now their insurance companies, or 3, now the insurance companies say, we're not going to pay for you anymore. So I do feel like, whether you start with 100 people or 200 people, 300 people to try to make it work, whatever that number is that's determined of the right population, the right skill sets, to see if we can have a model that can be replicated in other places. I would say, as far as the other end of the spectrum of somebody you want to go, and they're not struggling with drug addiction or alcohol addiction, they're not in the criminal justice system, they're deciding to be on the streets, they're really stubborn. By the way, some of these people are just not candidates. A lot of these issues, when you need help in life, you have to want to have that help. If you put that person in that setting and they really don't want to go, they're actually, in some cases, they're not a good person to put there because it can adversely impact the recovery of others. But I would say that reputation would matter. If it works and it gets replicated and people buy into it, they trust the process, I think you can get more buy-in and more people wanting to seek it out.
So you're talking about basically taking these old prisons and turning them into drug rehab centers, starting with incarcerated people, and then any homeless people that want to go.
Not just incarcerated. There are, as we are having this press conference, across New York State are people who sadly are ODing. Others are ending up in a hospital. There are ambulances right now in New York carrying somebody to a hospital who needs help that is not necessarily in a skill set of that hospital. When you create this setting, you're not going to just expect the doctors, the hospitals, the providers, the psychiatrists, the psychologists, the schools, the businesses, the families to all just be promoting it. But you're going to have to start with what is determined to be a smaller sample size and a model that works, and then I think it would take off from there.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Now, I am always willing to answer whatever questions you guys have with regards to anything. And I think that it's really important that this process that's played out over the last 24 hours is one that I believe that the media needs to very strongly encourage, maybe even shame, pre-pandemic access, changes to FOIL so that we have a presumption of approval as opposed to a presumption of denial when you submit those requests. The 3 persons in a room approach to governance is wrong. We need all 213 legislators with a voice so that their constituents all feel like they have representation here. And they should be coming to the cameras to you so that when you're staying up at 2 o'clock in the morning wondering what's next, actually you should have been able to have a better idea of that in the light of day several hours earlier and not be blindsided by it. And then also our legislators being blindsided by it too. But this is something I will continue to do to make myself accessible to you all to be able to answer whatever questions, whatever follow-up questions you have on any topics.
I love it. Do you think Chris Jacobs should withdraw from running for re-election?
I believe that he is not going to get reelected. That's a personal decision he needs to make. He is a sitting member of Congress. I will say that I had no idea that he was going to say that. It's a position that I strongly disagree with. It's a position that is out of touch with where the Republican primary voters are in that district. So he has to decide by today. I'm going to let him make that decision today on his own as to what he wants to do. That's his decision. But I will say that my belief is that if he chooses not to withdraw, that I don't believe that he would win a Republican primary.
And if you were elected governor, would you categorically oppose any new gun control measures?
As a member of Congress, I have a record working with the other side on the Fix NICS bill and voting for it, supporting the Stop School Violence Act. There's actually a new bill that is about, it's called Classrooms Over Conference Rooms, which is considered the Stop School Violence Act Part 2, to invest further into school safety.
But that's not gun control.
It depends how you look at it. I believe having a conversation about school safety should be part of this discussion. Fix NICS was about the background check system. But when I advocate for the Stop School Violence Act, so some people, when there is a tragedy took place, like what happened in Texas, they only want to talk about the facts, the narrative, the policy proposals that fit into what best serves their political beliefs. Now, if you are a member of Congress and you disagree on the merits, you disagree with me that there should be trained, armed school resource officers. On the merits, I have no problem with you taking the other side and saying, hey, I disagree with that idea. Now that's my position. I believe that that would be good. I support single point of entry into schools. There are Democrats out there who agree with me. We can work together on it. If there's somebody else out there who feels like we should not have single point of entry into schools and that we should have multiple point of entries into schools, let's have that debate. But what's really irresponsible is that when you have any type of a tragedy take place of any sorts, and you set a rule to the debate where I will not even talk about anything other than this set of facts, this set of the narrative, these set of policy proposals, and I don't talk about anything else, even if I publicly agree with you on the other stuff, I do believe that it's a good idea for us to be talking about school safety.
So just to be sure, if elected governor, you would not categorically rule out supporting gun control measures?
I happen to think that New York goes too far. So if you were to ask me as governor, what do I support? I believe that the SAFE Act is unconstitutional.
Well,
I believe it's
that
a
you
bad
think
proposal.
the laws are too strict and you would change them, but would you support any additional gun control measures of any type?
So I would say that one of the issues that we have is that there are attempted illegal purchases of firearms all the time here in New York. The system works in catching them, and then they don't get prosecuted. I believe that there is an improvement that can be made where you pass a law that conservatives, moderates, liberals agree on, Republicans, Democrats, independents, we're all in agreement that that is a good thing to do. And then you don't actually hold anybody accountable for what is an attempted illegal purchase of a firearm. So I do believe that we can, there's discussion on every single topic, but if you're gonna ask me where do I stand personally, I believe that New York's gun control laws go too far. And I would support a repeal of the SAFE Act for the same exact reason I articulated earlier. Doesn't matter how well intentioned it is. What we said was that if you're a law-abiding citizen, you will be able to go get a rifle legally. If you're a criminal, you could go out and get a rifle legally and then just modify it. You could just throw a pistol grip on it. You could swap out the buttstock to it. Didn't make it more lethal, just made it more scary looking. So if you're asking me where do I as governor stand as it relates to gun control, I believe that New York goes too far.
I don't want to keep you forever, but you said you'd answer any questions. So if you repeal the SAFE Act, that would mean that AR-15s, DDR, M4s, et cetera, would be de facto legal here in New York.
AR-15s are legal.
AR-15s are specifically banned by the SAFE Act, but
You
say
have
a Bushmaster
you have to have a feature added to it. So like the Buffalo shooter. So like listen, the Buffalo shooter legally obtained an AR-15.
Well, you bought a Bushmaster, slightly different.
4 different features of the SAFE Act. And this was something else that we said is they wrote the bill. We said, listen, you don't realize how this plays out. There's a way to design a rifle that still will have these different things, but the way that it's designed will fit under your law. Some people say, are you in favor of banning assault rifles? And I asked the person, how do you define an assault rifle? And I'm not saying that to be funny. I'm not trying to put them in a bad position. I want to know how they define it because there's different definitions, and the definition matters. I will tell you that the definition that I get most often when someone courageously wants to answer it is that they say it's a gun where you pull your finger down on the button and a whole bunch of things come out of the clip. You know, like da 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 da. Now, and I appreciate that they are offering to me their understanding of it. Now, I will then engage in a conversation, not trying to embarrass the person, but walking them through how New York State defines an assault rifle. There is a belief that automatic weapons are on the street. They were banned a very long time ago. There's some historically, right, long time ago. There's some people historically, stuff grandfathered in. There are relics. Those are a few exceptions that are out there. And there are different definitions of assault rifles. But if you reverse the ban on the SAFE Act, you would still be able to, by the way, if you don't reverse the ban on the SAFE Act, you can go out and get a rifle as long as it doesn't have one of those extra features to it.
So let's say we define assault rifle as a semi-automatic rifle with removable magazine. To be sure, you think that anything that just meets that definition should be legal here in New York State?
Yes. A semi-automatic weapon is a firearm that requires you to pull the trigger down once in order to make the bullet come out. So there's some people who, when they think semi-automatic, they're thinking that you are pulling the trigger down and then you're just unloading the magazine. But would I support a ban on a firearm? Any firearm that requires you to pull that will release one bullet for each trigger squeeze, I do not support that.
You used to carry an M4 in the service, right?
Yes.
Now, the only difference I recall, tell me if I'm wrong, is that with an M4 you can fire a 3-round burst, and with an AR-15 you can't.
So you can fire a 3-round burst with the M4. There are ways to modify all sorts of different firearms. So we can have there's 2 different conversations to be had. One is the conversation amongst law-abiding citizens, and the other one is the conversation with a criminal. Now, if you're a criminal, the question is, how do you obtain the firearm? But ultimately, a lot of creative criminals are able to very easily figure out how to discharge extra bullets more easily. That was, as we saw in the Las Vegas shooting, all of a sudden people were talking about the technology of bump stocks. There was no conversation in state capitals about bump stocks, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, there's a ban that got enacted on bump stocks. But it's really 2 different questions and answers based off of whether or not we're talking about what would a law-abiding citizen do and what would a criminal do. But even though you obtain a rifle that is 1 bullet per trigger squeeze, that doesn't mean that criminal can't figure out other ways to discharge more rounds faster. But banning all firearms that are semi-automatic, meaning 1 bullet per trigger squeeze, I do not support that.